Have you ever considered the ultimate fate of those MG42 operators who, after cutting down thousands of Allied troops on the exposed shores, finally laid down their arms? We will reveal what became of them, along with the untold narratives from the largest amphibious assault ever mounted. First, we must establish the context. From its introduction in 1942, the MG42 rapidly evolved into the standard-issue machine gun for German forces. It was a constant companion from the deserts of North Africa to the brutal Eastern Front, and a fixture in nearly every defensive setup they constructed. We are all familiar with the legends of Hitler's Buzzsaw, its fearsome report, and its unbelievable cyclic rate. Its dependability and lethality cemented its role in countless World War II accounts. But our purpose today is not to reiterate the same technical data and monikers. We are going to examine the experience of operating such a weapon and the final reckoning that met the individuals who fired it on D-Day. The German High Command was convinced that halting an invasion required annihilating it while it was still in the water, leading to the construction of fortified sites known as Widerstandsnester, or resistance nests, all across the coastline. Their placement was strategic, ensuring each could provide mutual support with interlocking fields of fire from artillery and machine guns. Omaha Beach contained 15 such fortified locations alone, with numerous emplacements designed to fire enfilade down the beach. This meant any soldier evading one weapon's arc would immediately move into the line of fire of a different one. A typical MG42 team included 3 soldiers: the primary gunner, a loader who managed ammunition belts and changed out red-hot barrels, and an additional soldier tasked with carrying extra rounds. A significant number had seen action in prior battles, but by 1944, several crews were filled with inexperienced younger soldiers who had never faced combat. Regardless of their history, their duty in that emplacement was unambiguous. When D-Day arrived, that duty distilled into a single, stark reality: to continue firing until the beach was empty of enemies, or to perish at their post in the attempt. What the majority failed to comprehend, however, was that the very weapon that instilled such dread also marked them as high-value targets. Fully aware of the defenses, Allied strategists prepared by meticulously charting the shore, identifying strong points and weapon positions concealed within the cliffs. Intelligence personnel cataloged these resistance nests by their grid coordinates and number, and the strategy appeared perfectly straightforward in theory. Bombers and naval guns were to demolish the fortifications, leaving the infantry to eliminate any remnants. In practice, however, many of those guns were still fully operational when the landing craft gates fell. The naval barrage that morning was immense. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers commenced firing before sunrise, targeting the entire coast and its known defensive works. Thousands of shells hammered the bluffs and shoreline, yet the reinforced concrete bunkers withstood even point-blank artillery strikes, leaving many nests largely intact. The German soldiers inside understood a major event was unfolding, and when they finally peered out, they were met with an astonishing spectacle. Hundreds of Allied landing craft heading straight for the beaches. While British and Canadian forces had specialized tanks, Hobart's funnies, to assist in destroying bunkers that survived the initial shelling, the Americans encountered severe difficulties with the armored support intended for Omaha Beach. Their answer was meant to be duplex drive tanks, but of the 32 launched with the first assault wave, 27 foundered and only 5 reached the sand. From those, merely 3 were combat-ready, and they were all swiftly destroyed, transforming the battle to eliminate the remaining machine gun nests into a slaughter. The survival prospects for everyone involved were, as you would expect, exceedingly low. And the scenes that unfolded once those guns commenced firing were so horrific that they are discussed even now. The proficiency of the German machine gun teams was greatly enhanced by their tactical doctrine. A frequent method was termed mowing the grass, which involved aiming low to strike legs and incapacitate soldiers. Injured men would subsequently attract medics and comrades attempting rescue, thereby presenting the gunner with more targets and inflicting greater losses on the enemy. Various other deceptive techniques were employed, and a surprising number proved effective. For instance, one gun might fire tracer ammunition high, creating the illusion of inaccurate fire, while a second, concealed weapon fired at the actual lethal elevation. It was an elementary ruse, but it deceived sufficient soldiers to get them killed, catching many completely unprepared. When the initial assault waves reached the beach, the meticulously laid plans disintegrated and casualties escalated rapidly. Isolated squads of soldiers started advancing on their own accord, utilizing any available shelter they could locate. On a vast open beach, however, possibilities were scarce, with tank obstacles, shell craters, and even the deceased serving as the only options. Allied training had instructed troops to advance during the MG42's short intervals for reloading or barrel swaps, and some officers screamed for their men to rush ahead in those critical moments. One sergeant assembled a small squad with a bazooka to assault WN-61, a strongpoint unleashing devastating fire across the sands. They first eliminated a supporting 50mm anti-tank gun, then advanced to systematically take out the MG42 crews one after another. In the fierce close-quarters combat around the bunkers, they killed 7 defenders and neutralized 2 gun emplacements, sustaining only a single fatality and 1 wounded soldier. That lone initiative alleviated the pressure on that section of the beach and created an avenue for movement inland. All across Omaha, however, rangers, engineers, and infantrymen crept forward for hours under intense fire, striving desperately to reach the bunkers. At Dog White, rangers charged a strong point under cover of smoke and silenced its weapons, while in the Easy Red sector on Omaha, engineers cleared paths and enabled troops to scale the cliffs and flank the gunners who had immobilized them for hours. But reaching a machine gun bunker was only part of the objective. The true conflict occurred in the immediate aftermath. When assault teams finally attained an MG42 nest, they would hurl grenades and satchel charges to neutralize it, then gun down any remaining personnel. Once they were sufficiently close, flamethrowers were used to incinerate the bunkers and eliminate the position. After finally breaching the defenses and securing the beach, some German gunners who were wounded or had exhausted their ammunition chose to surrender. But having inflicted such severe losses on the Allies and with combat adrenaline at its peak, not every attempt to surrender was honored. By mid-afternoon, the momentum had shifted. Isolated groups of U.S. infantry and engineers had battled their way to the high ground and destroyed or circumvented the last remaining nests. An after-action report from Omaha stated that the high ground was captured exclusively through the sheer, fearless courage of the infantry and their engineers after the preliminary bombardment had proven ineffective. The effect of silencing the MG42s was instantaneous. With the beach exits now accessible, tanks and reinforcements could finally advance inland, and the German defensive line lost its most crucial source of firepower. The separate secured positions were linked up, and the invasion gained momentum. German MG42 crews continued to fight in the hedgerows of Normandy. But they would never again be concentrated in such formidable positions, nor would they ever have another opportunity to halt the Allied advance in a single day. On June 6th, the MG42 had reached the limits of its effectiveness, and the harrowing accounts of young men on both sides, trapped in one of history's most lethal mornings, will endure indefinitely. For the Allied infantry, confronting an MG42 was pure terror. Many soldiers in the first wave were straight from training and had never experienced genuine combat. Long before they saw the beach, they could detect the weapon's unique staccato, a sustained ripping noise that some compared to cloth tearing or the sound of a power saw. Seasoned soldiers later confessed the noise itself was enough to petrify a man, fixing him in place. When the landing craft ramps lowered, the natural impulse was to drop to the sand and remain there. One American squad leader remembered shouting at his men to move forward to survive, which was the sole method to break their paralysis under the storm of bullets. But across that wide, open shore, every soldier knew he was completely vulnerable to the heavy fire. Army medic Ray Lambert later recounted how rounds were cutting through the water and striking men who were already floundering in the surf. Some units were nearly wiped out before they even landed. In the Dog Green sector, one company suffered almost 90% casualties within minutes. And yet, within the disorder, men continued to advance, some following orders, some out of a sense of obligation, and some merely because staying put meant certain death. From the other side of the barrel, the perspective was entirely different, yet just as frightening. For the German gunners, the morning started in darkness. At Strong Point WN62, overlooking Omaha Beach, 20-year-old Heinrich Sevelo was awakened by the alarm. The invasion had started. By first light, he was at his prepared firing position with an MG42, gazing out at a sight he later described as surreal. Hundreds of vessels and thousands of men advancing directly toward him. As the first landing craft entered his effective range, Sevelo began firing. Over the subsequent 9 hours, he fired belt after belt into the approaching waves of infantry, expending nearly 12,000 rounds in total. His assistant gunner had been killed, forcing him to operate the weapon alone, and around him his comrades were being killed one by one. Sevelo said it felt hopeless because no matter how many he shot, more kept arriving. By early afternoon, with his position being overrun and his ammunition depleted, he seized a rifle and fled. That retreat became a frantic fight for survival through shell holes and hedgerows until nightfall. The next morning, surrounded by American soldiers, he surrendered, but was prudent enough not to disclose that he had been one of the machine gunners responsible for so much carnage on the beach. Not every gunner was that fortunate, as many were killed inside their bunkers, and those taken alive were often shocked to be shown any mercy, given the intensity of the combat and the casualties they had inflicted. And not all were that lucky. For both sides, the ordeal left profound psychological wounds. Allied veterans talked of never being able to forget the MG42's fire, and German veterans spoke of the specific moments and faces that haunted them long after the conflict ended. While successful, assaulting an MG42 position was never a clean by-the-book operation. It typically involved approaching perilously close, often within mere meters, all while under heavy suppression. Every forward movement was a gamble that the gunner would not see them, with their very lives and all progress made thus far at stake. A significant number of men were killed just meters from their goal, moments before they could strike. And once the fighting moved inside the bunker, it was swift, savage, and typically concluded in an instant. For the men operating the machine guns, these final moments were the nightmare they had dreaded since the invasion began. Once the Allies broke through, you were trapped. The heavy firing ports that shielded you from the front also prevented your escape. Your choices were to fight until you were overrun or to attempt surrender, and neither option was reassuring. MG42 crews knew they were high-priority targets. The devastation they wrought made them the most despised figures on the battlefield, and many feared the consequences if the attacking soldiers reached them first. Most Allied troops adhered to the rules of the 1929 Geneva Convention, processing prisoners as mandated, but there are testimonies of captured gunners being executed immediately by men who had just seen their friends killed by that very gun. It was challenging to maintain a professional demeanor toward someone who had just caused the deaths of your comrades moments before their capture. That unpredictability loomed over every decision in those final minutes. Furthermore, not all German gunners were dedicated Nazis or seasoned veterans. Some were conscripts from Eastern Europe, forced into service and motivated more by fear of their own commanders than by any loyalty to Hitler. In several instances, these men surrendered quickly once their situation became hopeless. Others continued to resist, possibly out of despair or a conviction that surrender would not spare them. In any case, the psychological burden on an MG42 gunner was tremendous. You could hear the attackers drawing nearer, the sound of footsteps on the ground above, simply waiting for a grenade to be dropped inside. And when that end arrived, it was not always the release the gunners had anticipated, as many would learn in the desperate final moments of D-Day's beach battles. It may be hard to believe, but sometimes death was the preferable outcome, as there are even accounts of isolated retaliations during the Normandy campaign where captured MG teams faced vengeance for the reasons we've discussed. Such incidents were seldom officially recorded, possibly to avoid public scrutiny of clear violations of the laws of war, and they were eclipsed by the monumental Allied victory that established a new front in Europe, one that would ultimately conclude the war. And one can only speculate about what events soldiers were forbidden from ever discussing. For many MG42 gunners who survived D-Day, the end of the war did not erase the memories of that morning. Some, like the Heinrich Sevelo we mentioned, returned home to farms and towns that appeared unchanged, but they carried a war within them that they could not forget. Sevelo spoke very little about Omaha Beach for decades, but the burden never left him. Years later, he contacted families of fallen comrades and even met David Silver, an American veteran he had wounded. The two men, who had once tried to kill one another, now sat together and conversed. It was a meeting neither could have envisioned in 1944, and for Sevelo, it offered a small degree of peace. Many other German veterans led quiet lives, seldom speaking of the MG42, except with other former soldiers. For them, the weapon represented both a point of professional pride and a source of personal shame. For the survivors, the MG42 was remembered as a natural phenomenon, a ferocious power you never forgot. In memoirs, when a veteran wrote that a machine gun opened up, they were most often referring to the MG42. Films such as The Longest Day and Saving Private Ryan introduced its distinctive buzzsaw sound to the new generations, while the bunkers in Normandy remain as quiet testaments to its fearsome power and the enduring scars it inflicted on all who faced it. If you were captivated by this deep dive into one of history's most formidable weapons and the men who wielded it, you need to see more. Subscribe to Rootvolutionary now for untold stories and rigorous historical analysis. Don't miss out. Join our community and explore the past, root by root.